I'm gonna get you for it, Marshal.
You couldn't get me in the back, how are you gonna get me face on? Why don't you just give up?
Before The Simpsons and before Law & Order, one show ruled American television like no other. It had drama, grit, unforgettable characters, and a few secrets no one saw coming. From surprise cameos to silent cancellations, Gunsmoke wasn't just a Western. It was a revolution on screen. But how did it become a cultural giant? And what really happened behind the scenes?
Well, how are you, Doc? How you been?
Why don't you go back where you came from?
Well, what happened to you? Somebody pulled you through a knothole?
Premiering in 1955, Gunsmoke wasn't an overnight success story. It was already known to many before it even hit television screens. The show actually started on the radio in 1952. Set in Dodge City, Kansas during the post-Civil War era of the 1870s, the radio version featured William Conrad as the voice of Marshal Matt Dillon. From the very beginning, the show was serious in tone, designed specifically for adults. At a time when many Westerns leaned toward family-friendly or even cartoonish adventures, Gunsmoke aimed to present a grittier, more realistic view of life in the American West. Its setting in Dodge City wasn't chosen by accident. This Kansas town was a well-known symbol of frontier life, raw, dangerous, and full of new beginnings. It provided the perfect backdrop for stories about justice, survival, and moral choices in a rapidly changing world. Each episode of the radio show followed Marshal Dillon as he tried to maintain law and order in a place where violence was often just around the corner. Despite a rocky start with no major sponsors, CBS believed in Gunsmoke. The network kept the radio version running from 1952 to 1961, and during that time it gained a loyal following. Even in its early years, it was praised for its writing and tone. Critics and fans alike called it one of the finest radio dramas ever made. In 1955, the decision was made to bring Gunsmoke to television. That move changed everything. The TV version aired on CBS and featured actor James Arness as Marshal Matt Dillon, a casting choice suggested by none other than John Wayne, who declined the role himself. Wayne believed Arness had the right presence for the part, and his recommendation proved to be spot on. The early episodes were just 30 minutes long. These short installments delivered fast-paced drama, often focusing on a single moral or social issue. But by 1961, the producers decided to expand the episodes to 1 hour. That change gave the writers and directors more room to explore characters and storylines in greater depth, and audiences responded. The show continued to grow in popularity. Over time, Gunsmoke became one of the most watched and talked about series on television. In its second season, it climbed into the top 10 highest-rated shows in the United States. From 1957 through 1961, it held the #1 spot. At a time when TV was still finding its voice, Gunsmoke had already become a household name. At the center of the show was Marshal Matt Dillon, a lawman who tried to bring order to a lawless frontier. He was firm but fair, respected by some and feared by others. But he wasn't alone in Dodge City. His team of supporting characters played a big role in shaping the show's identity. There was Chester Good, played by Dennis Weaver, a loyal deputy with a limp and a nervous charm. Later, Chester was replaced by Festus Hagen, a gruff but well-meaning character portrayed by Ken Curtis. Both deputies provided comic relief and human vulnerability, especially when Matt wasn't around. Then there was Doc Adams, the town physician. Played by Milburn Stone, Doc was intelligent and caring, but known for his old-school medical methods and dry sense of humor. He often served as a voice of reason during the show's more chaotic moments. And finally, there was Miss Kitty Russell, the owner of the Long Branch Saloon. Amanda Blake played Kitty as a strong, independent businesswoman who wasn't afraid to stand her ground. While her relationship with Matt Dillon was never fully romantic on screen, their bond was deep and often implied. It gave the show a subtle emotional thread that ran beneath the surface. What made Gunsmoke stand out from other westerns of its time wasn't just the gunfights or action scenes. It was the way it balanced tension with quieter, character-driven moments. The show took its time to explore moral dilemmas, emotional conflicts, and even humor. Episodes often started with a small problem, someone new arriving in town, a disagreement at the saloon, or a missing person. But they quickly unfolded into layered stories about justice, community, and the human condition. Even though the stories were set in the 19th century, the themes were timeless. Many of them could have taken place in any town, in any era. That relatability helped Gunsmoke connect with a wide range of viewers. Whether someone lived in a big city or a small rural town, they could see a bit of their own world reflected in Dodge City. By the time Gunsmoke had been on television for a decade, it had become more than just a Western. It was a cultural institution. Between 1955 and 1975, the show aired a total of 635 episodes, making it the longest-running scripted primetime drama in American television history at the time. It held that record until The Simpsons surpassed it in 2018, although Gunsmoke still holds the record for most episodes in a live-action primetime series. During its 20-year run, Gunsmoke outlasted countless other shows, including some of its direct competition in the Western genre. From Bonanza to Alias Smith and Jones, few other series had the same level of staying power. In fact, while over 30 different Western-themed shows aired during Gunsmoke's time on the air, none matched its longevity or consistency. What's perhaps most impressive is how the show evolved over time. Early black and white episodes gave way to full-color productions. Characters came and went, stories became more complex, and the show's tone shifted with the times. Yet through it all, Gunsmoke stayed true to its original vision, a serious adult Western grounded in realism. Critics noticed this too. Cecil Smith of the Los Angeles Times once described Gunsmoke as our own Iliad and Odyssey, referring to the epic scope and lasting appeal of the show. It was more than just a series of cowboy stories, it was in its own way a modern American myth. Viewers of the time weren't just watching for entertainment. They were tuning in for consistency, for characters they trusted, and for stories that reflected real challenges and values. That consistency made Gunsmoke feel less like a show and more like a part of people's lives. It became routine, something families watched together week after week. And even though the television landscape has changed dramatically since then, Gunsmoke's influence can still be felt. It paved the way for more complex storytelling on TV. It helped prove that audiences were ready for shows with depth, mature themes, and long-term character development. In that sense, it wasn't just a Western. It was one of the first great American dramas. As the show continued into the 1960s and 70s, it faced new challenges, both from other programs and from shifts in public taste. But in its early years, there was no doubt about its success. Gunsmoke had arrived and it wasn't going anywhere. In its early years, Gunsmoke followed a simple format. Episodes were 30 minutes long, often focusing on a single storyline that could be resolved quickly. But as audience expectations began to shift in the 1960s, the show's creators knew it had to evolve. In 1961, the episodes were extended to a full hour. This change gave writers more space to explore not just weekly conflicts, but the deeper emotional lives of the characters. The longer format allowed Gunsmoke to stand apart from other Westerns of the time. It became more than just a shootout of the week series. Viewers began to invest in the lives of the people in Dodge City, not just Marshall Dillon, but also Doc Adams, Chester, Thesis, and Miss Kitty. Their relationships became more nuanced. Episodes began to explore themes like justice, loneliness, loyalty, and loss. That shift in storytelling helped the show stay fresh, even as dozens of other Westerns came and went. Over the course of its run, Gunsmoke aired 635 episodes. That figure wasn't just impressive, it was a record. For many years, no other scripted primetime television series had reached that number. And the show's ability to hold viewers' attention for so long speaks to how well it was able to grow and change with the times. But growth didn't always mean smooth sailing. By the late 1960s, Gunsmoke began to face serious competition. The golden age of the television Western was starting to fade. New genres were emerging. Younger audiences were looking for different kinds of stories, and some critics began to question whether Gunsmoke still had a place on TV. CBS, the network that had supported the show since the beginning, started to reconsider its future. In 1967, after 12 years on the air, Gunsmoke was quietly placed on the chopping block. The plan was to cancel the show and replace it with a younger, more modern program. One candidate for that time slot was Gilligan's Island, a lighthearted comedy about castaways that had been doing relatively well in the ratings. But something unexpected happened. The proposed cancellation sparked a wave of protest. not from viewers alone, but from inside CBS itself. William Paley, the president of the network, had long been a fan of Gunsmoke. He was known for having a personal attachment to the show, and his wife, Babe Paley, reportedly pressured him not to let it end. That internal pushback changed everything. Instead of canceling Gunsmoke, CBS made a strategic move. They shifted the show to a new time slot, Mondays at 8 p.m. This small change had a major effect. Ratings began to climb again, and the show returned to the network's top 10 list. The move didn't just save the series, it extended its life for nearly another decade. This wasn't the only time that fan loyalty and internal support would keep Gunsmoke going. Throughout its run, the series had a core group of viewers who stuck with it through format changes, cast changes, and cultural shifts. That kind of viewer dedication is rare, and it speaks to how deeply the show had embedded itself in American culture. What also helped was the steady presence of James Arness, who played Marshal Matt Dillon. Arness stayed with the series from beginning to end. He never took a break, never walked away, and never demanded more than what was fair. His quiet professionalism made a huge difference behind the scenes. Producers and crew members often said that Arness set the tone on set, calm, focused, and committed. But Arness also had to push through personal challenges to keep the show going. During World War II, he had served in the U.S. Army and was injured in battle. He was shot in the leg during the invasion of Anzio in Italy, and the damage was severe. Though he recovered enough to act, the injury never fully healed. By the time he was filming Gunsmoke, he still experienced regular pain. To make filming easier, the crew began to schedule all of his walking scenes early in the day when his leg was less stiff. It was a quiet, practical accommodation that allowed him to keep performing without drawing attention to his injury. That kind of behind-the-scenes flexibility was key to the show's survival. The crew was known for being adaptable, working around injuries, time constraints, and network demands. Over the years, they also had to respond to wider cultural changes. One of the clearest examples of this came during the late 1960s and early 1970s, as public attitudes toward violence on television began to shift. In the early seasons of Gunsmoke, the opening credits famously included a gunfight. Week after week, audiences would see Matt Dillon face off against a nameless challenger in the dusty streets of Dodge. It was a classic visual, dramatic, fast, and full of tension. But as the Vietnam War dragged on and media scrutiny around televised violence increased, the mood in the country changed. Critics and parents began to raise concerns about what kind of messages were being sent through popular shows. In response, the creators of Gunsmoke made a quiet but meaningful change. They removed the gunfight from the opening credits and replaced it with a less violent introduction. It was a subtle shift, but it reflected a larger awareness of how entertainment needed to evolve. This wasn't the only way the show adjusted to the times. Cigarette sponsorships, once common in early television, began to disappear by the 1970s. For its first 7 seasons, Gunsmoke had been sponsored by L&M cigarettes. James Arness even appeared in ads promoting the brand, encouraging viewers to watch L&M's Gunsmoke each week on CBS. But in 1970, the U.S. government passed the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act, banning all cigarette advertisements on television. The show quickly moved away from tobacco-related sponsors, in line with the new laws and changing public health views. Through all of this, Gunsmoke kept going. It managed to balance tradition with adaptation, keeping its core values while responding to a world that was changing fast. And its audience rewarded that effort with continued loyalty. Eventually, all shows come to an end. But in Gunsmoke's case, the final curtain fell more suddenly than expected. In 1975, CBS canceled the show without any warning to the cast or crew. There was no official finale, no special farewell episode. The news came through trade papers, not through any internal announcement. According to Arness, everyone expected to go on for another year or two. Instead, it was over, just like that. Even so, the impact of the show didn't end there. Over the years that followed, CBS produced 5 made-for-TV movies based on Gunsmoke, giving fans a bit more time with the characters they had grown up with. These films, though not quite the same as the weekly episodes, helped give some closure and reminded audiences just how important the show had been. More than anything else, Gunsmoke survived because it respected its audience. It never talked down to them, never relied on cheap tricks, and never forgot that it was telling stories about people, flawed, brave, funny, and real. It's that honesty, combined with the loyalty of its cast and the support of its fans, that kept the show going even when everything else said it should stop. One of the longest-running rumors about the show involves its lead role. For years, fans speculated that John Wayne was the original choice to play Marshal Matt Dillon. The story goes that Wayne turned it down but suggested James Arness for the role instead. In truth, John Wayne never intended to take on the part himself. According to Charles Marquis Warren, a director and writer who worked on the show and knew Wayne personally, the actor had no interest in television. He reportedly disliked the idea of working in the medium and didn't take it seriously at the time. But the part about recommending Arness is true. Wayne did know Arness and believed he was the right fit. His endorsement carried weight and it helped secure Arness the role that would define his career. Arness brought a quiet strength to Matt Dillon, but he also brought consistency. Unlike many TV stars who eventually leave a show to pursue film roles or new opportunities, Arness stayed from start to finish. That kind of loyalty is rare. Over 20 seasons, he became the face of Gunsmoke and a familiar figure in American homes. Even when he took smaller roles in some episodes, he remained the anchor of the series. In fact, only one other actor, Kelsey Grammer, known for playing Frasier Crane, has portrayed the same character in more episodes of a live-action series. But unlike Arness, many of Grammer's early appearances were brief. Arness carried Gunsmoke on his shoulders for 2 decades. Amanda Blake, who played Miss Kitty Russell, had her own journey into the role. In the early days of casting, she wasn't the first choice. The role was initially offered to actress Polly Bond, known for her work in the 1940s and married to Little Rascals actor Tommy Bond. Polly reportedly turned it down because the salary would have made her earnings higher than her husband's, and their marriage was already under pressure. Amanda Blake, determined and persistent, chased the role. She called, wrote letters, and made sure the producers knew she wanted it. Her persistence paid off, and she eventually became one of the show's most iconic characters. Miss Kitty was the saloon owner in Dodge City, and while her relationship with Matt Dillon was never shown as openly romantic, their connection was one of the most consistent threads in the show. There was a subtlety in their scenes together, something that left room for interpretation. Over time, fans began to wonder why their relationship never progressed into something more official. The truth is, the writers made a conscious choice to keep their bond ambiguous. Amanda Blake once joked that if Matt ever said, "Kitty, let's buy a farm and raise kids," the show would become a Western version of I Love Lucy. James Arness agreed, saying that taking the romance too far would change the dynamic of the series. Their quiet partnership became a defining feature, one of unspoken trust rather than melodrama. Other characters also came into their own in interesting ways. Thesis Hagen, the scruffy, lovable deputy introduced later in the series, was played by Ken Curtis. But Curtis didn't start out in that role. In fact, he played other minor characters before eventually landing the part of Thesis. The character was based on someone from Curtis's own childhood, a man known as Cedar Jack who made cedar fence posts and had a quirky, unforgettable way of speaking. Curtis used his memory of Cedar Jack to bring Thesis to life, and the result was one of the show's most beloved characters. Chester, the earlier deputy played by Dennis Weaver, had his own story. During casting, Weaver believed he was auditioning for the lead role of Matt Dillon. When he was asked to try out for Chester instead, he wasn't sure what to make of the character. To help Chester stand out, producers suggested giving him a unique physical trait. Weaver went home, practiced a limp in his backyard, and brought it back to the audition. That limp became part of Chester's identity, even though Weaver later admitted that it became physically exhausting to maintain through so many episodes. The show also had to keep evolving with the times, especially as the culture outside the studio began to shift. The late 1960s and early 1970s brought political tension, protests, and changing values in American society. People began to question the role of violence in media, especially during the Vietnam War. This public pressure led to changes in how Gunsmoke was presented. One major shift came in the opening credits. The original intro featured a dramatic gunfight between Matt Dillon and a stranger. But as criticism about violent television grew, producers removed that scene and replaced it with something less confrontational. It was a small adjustment, but one that acknowledged how entertainment had to reflect changing public sentiment. Health also became part of the show's evolution. In its first 7 seasons, Gunsmoke was sponsored by L&M cigarettes. The actors even appeared in promotional ads, with James Arness encouraging viewers to tune in each week. At the time, cigarette advertising was common, and many shows had tobacco companies as major sponsors. But by 1970, new laws banned cigarette ads on television. The Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act forced all networks to drop tobacco sponsorships. For Gunsmoke, it was the end of an era and the beginning of a broader shift in what was acceptable on television. Beyond the production decisions and cultural changes, there were also personal stories that shaped the show. Milburn Stone, who played Doc Adams, didn't have a first name for the first 16 years of the series. Eventually, the producers let him choose one himself. He picked Galen, and it stuck. His character had a rich backstory, one that included studying medicine in Philadelphia and traveling the country. But despite all that detail, the missing first name remained a mystery for much of the series. The cast grew close over time, and their off-screen relationships added depth to their on-screen chemistry. Glenn Strange, who played bartender Sam Noonan, had a surprising past. Before joining Gunsmoke, he was best known for playing Frankenstein's monster in several Universal horror films. After his passing in 1973, co-star Buck Taylor honored him by naming his son after him. It was a quiet but meaningful tribute, and it showed just how much the cast valued each other beyond the set. One character even led to a spin-off. In 1971, Gunsmoke introduced a new figure, Sally Fergus, a tobacco-chewing, no-nonsense woman who cared for a wounded gunfighter. Played by Jeanette Nolan, Sally was so popular with viewers that she was given her own show, Dirty Sally, in 1974. Although it only lasted 1 season, Nolan received a Primetime Emmy nomination for her performance. It was the only official spin-off from the Gunsmoke universe, but it showed that the show's characters had enough weight to stand on their own. Despite all the changes, casting twists, and production shifts, Gunsmoke held on to its core identity. It was a show about people, about loyalty, justice, and community. And while the Western setting provided the drama, it was the human stories that kept viewers coming back. The show came to an unexpected end in 1975. After 2 decades of stories from Dodge City, CBS pulled the plug without much warning. There was no final episode designed to say goodbye, no wrap-up show. The cast and crew found out not through an announcement, but by reading it in the industry trade papers. James Arness later recalled that they all expected to return for another season, maybe more. But that wasn't what the network had in mind. It was a quiet ending for a show that had been anything but quiet during its prime. Still, the fans hadn't forgotten. In the years that followed, CBS produced 5 made-for-television movies featuring the original characters. These films gave audiences one more chance to revisit Dodge City and reconnect with the people they had watched for so many years. While not quite the same as the weekly episodes, the movies helped bring a sense of closure that the abrupt cancellation never did. During its original run, Gunsmoke had a massive impact on pop culture. It influenced language, inspired other series, and helped shape the image of the American West for an entire generation. One of the most enduring examples of this influence is the phrase, "Get out of Dodge." Originally used on the show in reference to Dodge City, the line became popular among viewers. By the 1960s and especially into the 1980s, it had entered everyday language, often used to mean leave quickly or get out of a bad situation. Few shows can claim to have added lasting phrases to the cultural vocabulary, but Gunsmoke did just that. The series also set records that stood for decades. For many years, it held the title of the longest-running primetime live-action television show in American history. No other scripted series had aired more episodes during prime time. That record was finally broken in 2018, when The Simpsons surpassed Gunsmoke in total number of episodes. But even then, Gunsmoke remained the longest-running live-action scripted drama until 2019, when Law & Order Special Victims Unit began its 21st season. The original Law & Order had tied with Gunsmoke at 20 seasons before it was canceled in 2010, only to be revived more than a decade later. Still, numbers tell only part of the story. Gunsmoke didn't survive on ratings alone. What kept people watching was the sense of familiarity and emotional connection they had to the characters. They weren't just watching a Western, they were spending time with people they felt they knew. That feeling is hard to create, and even harder to maintain for 2 full decades. One of the most fascinating aspects of Gunsmoke's legacy is the long list of actors who passed through its sets before becoming stars in their own right. Over the years, Gunsmoke featured appearances from some of Hollywood's biggest names, many of whom were just starting their careers. Charles Bronson, known for his tough guy roles in action films, appeared early on as a villain named Krigo in an episode titled The Killer. He even returned later to play the same character again. David Carradine, famous for Kung Fu, also showed up as a horse thief. Before Harrison Ford ever piloted the Millennium Falcon or picked up a whip as Indiana Jones, he appeared in Gunsmoke. Other future stars included Dennis Hopper, Kurt Russell, Richard Dreyfuss, Nick Nolte, Sam Elliott, and Leslie Nielsen. These were small roles at the time, but they showed how the show served as a stepping stone for actors who would later become household names. There were also several notable crossovers with actors from other iconic series. Fans of Star Trek might be surprised to learn that many of its cast members appeared on Gunsmoke. William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and James Doohan all had guest spots. Even cast members from the Brady Bunch appeared. Christopher Knight, Eve Plum, and Susan Olsen each had roles in various episodes. For a show based in the Old West, Gunsmoke had a remarkable connection to the broader universe of American television. But what made Gunsmoke really stand out was how it treated its world and its characters. The stories weren't always about shootouts and standoffs. They often explored more subtle themes like loneliness, responsibility, aging, and moral compromise. In fact, one historian of the Old West, Marshall Trimble, estimated that Matt Dillon shot 407 people over the course of the series and the follow-up films. Not every one of those characters died, but the number still paints a picture of just how much conflict the show contained. The final on-screen death of the series was played by Gary Busey, whose character dies of a brain tumor in the last episode. It was a symbolic end, quiet, tragic, and without violence. It also marked the last dramatic moment in a series that had seen more than its share. From the beginning, the casting process was complex. Before James Arness was chosen, producers considered 26 other candidates for the role of Matt Dillon. One of them was William Conrad, who had voiced the character in the original radio series. But when it came time to move to television, the producers wanted someone with a different look and physical presence. Arness, standing at 6 feet 7 inches, brought a kind of visual authority that worked well on screen. Throughout its run, Gunsmoke won multiple awards, including 15 Primetime Emmy nominations and several wins. It also received nods from the Golden Globes, TV Land Awards, and the Western Heritage Awards. The Writers Guild of America and the Western Writers of America praised the show's storytelling. Despite being a genre series, Gunsmoke earned respect across the entertainment industry. The show's impact didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Its characters, settings, and themes continued to inspire new projects. Even though Gunsmoke had only one official spin-off, Dirty Sally, a short-lived series based on a guest character, it left behind a blueprint that other dramas would follow. Long-running series like Bonanza, Dallas, and NYPD Blue all borrowed elements from the structure Gunsmoke perfected: a strong central lead, a supporting cast with depth, and storylines that blended action with character development. What also helped cement the show's legacy was the strong bond among its cast. Even when actors left the show, like Dennis Weaver, who eventually moved on to other roles, they often spoke fondly of their time on Gunsmoke. The friendships formed on set, the shared experiences of long days and late nights, created a kind of extended family. That connection was real, and it came through in the performances. In the end, Gunsmoke was more than just a Western. It was a part of American culture, a show that managed to evolve with the times without losing its sense of identity. It balanced serious themes with lighter moments, honored its characters, and told stories that stayed with people long after the credits rolled. Even decades later, fans continue to rewatch the series, talk about the characters, and discover new details in old episodes. Whether it's the subtle relationship between Matt and Kitty, the loyalty of Thesis and Chester, or the quiet wisdom of Doc Adams, these moments still resonate. And that's the mark of great storytelling. It lives on, even when the show is long gone. So while Gunsmoke may have ended without a grand finale, its influence never really stopped. It set a standard, broke records, and helped shape television as we know it today. And for many fans, Dodge City will always be just a channel away.